Yeah!
Your Money America. Hey, we got something exciting stuff to talk about this week. In addition to just all the crazy political stuff going on.
Yeah.
But anyways, I don't know. You want to reveal kind of what we've been talking about the podcast?
Sure. Well, we've been talking for a while about possibly renaming the podcast because Beer Money America has three very common words associated with many other things. So
We never
we
really thought
decided
about that.
that, yeah, that perhaps would be a good idea to set us apart a little bit more from the crowd is to give it a name change. And I guess we've decided on Coalition Purple.
Love it. Love it. And I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense because obviously we're talking about third parties primarily,
Yeah.
and they tend to get grouped as when you hear purple states and things like that, that's where it's more of a balanced situation, and that's what we're all about. So I think the color part of it makes a lot of sense, and then just thinking about really, it's about trying to bring all these independently minded folks. You could still be a Republican and be
Yeah.
independently minded, um, together to really try and kind of just further the discussions beyond all the kind of tribalism that's going on right now between the
Yeah.
two major parties.
Because
So
I actually think
I think it's good.
the coalition part of it really is very important because let's face it, if you want to have a new party in the country that's going to have an impact on how things work, the biggest impact it could possibly have is to force coalition building. It's not so much that you need to eliminate the Republicans or you need to eliminate the Democrats. It's that
Yeah.
you need to have a situation where you have to have good ideas to get things through rather than just demonizing an opponent. So if a third party, a new party, is going to come around and be influential, it's going to have to govern through coalition because it's not immediately going to be a party that's large enough to have a majority everywhere. It's going to have to work with the other parties. So having a coalition, having good ideas, I think a lot of that is what new parties and third parties are really all about.
Yeah, and they can really be the catalyst because
Yeah,
good ideas can come from anywhere, right?
absolutely.
I mean, it's not to say Republicans and Democrats at times haven't had some great ideas, right?
Yeah,
So that's not the point. To your point, it really is about coalition and trying to just get the conversation back to, about policy and not tribal politics and all that kind of stuff. So Coalition Purple just seems to make a lot of sense, and I know we probably overanalyzed it more than we should have.
yeah,
That's
well,
the way that's the way these things go. It's like it makes you kind of realize sometimes some of the crazy things that we hear going on, and hey, they're starting a new committee about this, that, or the other thing. It's like,
yeah.
really? Do you need a committee over that? But here we are. So, um, but kind of leading on. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I would say if you yeah, bring it on.
Oh,
What have you?
Oh, okay. I just happened to run across, speaking of kind of the whole coalition building thing. Um, I don't even know why I stumbled upon this. It was actually a Gallup poll that was done back last October, so it's a little dated, although not that long ago. And it was in that poll where they were saying 63% of the voters that they talked to would be interested in seeing a third party.
Yeah,
So I mean, that tells you right there. And what was interesting about it is when they break it down. I don't do statistics very well, but when they break it all down, 58% of Republicans favored looking at a third party, and
yeah,
45% of Democrats. Now, I think that's probably has a lot to do with who's in charge as president at the time.
yeah,
Um, but so when your guy's in there or gal's in there, it's like, maybe not such a good idea.
yeah.
Um, but it was interesting that such a large percentage of Republicans, uh, are open to that sort of thing. But even still, 45% is a lot for Democrats considering they're kind of in charge at the moment.
Yeah. Well, I
So
think
I
that
mean, it goes back down to the whole coalition thing that there's a group of people out there that at least think about it in a abstract idea that, hey, this could be a good thing.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've sort of been wanting to talk about, and I don't know if we've talked about it too much on this podcast. And, I'm getting old. I don't remember what I talked about last week. So have to,
No,
should
you're
have
paying,
to
man.
assume that I haven't talked about this too much yet. But it's the idea of, if you're going to create a new party, one of the things that you have to have is you have to have some sort of message or ideology that is appealing to enough people that you can get enough people to, join the party, back it, and be something of significance. And I think that you have to sort of identify, what your message is going to be, and where you're going to take it. And I think that there's this great number of people that fit into this sort of very broad category of fiscally conservative but socially liberal. And I think there's a lot of, then it comes down to priorities. If you're fiscally conservative and that's really the thing that is super important to you, you probably end up voting more Republican. If the socially liberal part is what's really important to you, then you probably end up voting for Democrats more often. But if you had an actual party that actually represented both of those ideas, that you can have a party of fiscal responsibility that wants to deal with debt and address those type of things, and have a sustainable growing economy, and at the same time respect the civil liberties of everybody in the country.
Right.
Well, to me, that is the blueprint for what the new party has to look like. And I think there's lots of ways that you can set that party apart from the other two existing parties. But I think the reason you see that so many people are willing to look at a third party, from both parties, is because they are stuck in that quandary. It's like, well, I do agree with one party on this, but I disagree with them so greatly on the other part of it that, I'm voting one way or the other. So if you come along and you can make something new that says, look, we do believe in responsible governance, because in the end, responsible governance is good for everybody, because you can't have a giant mess collapsing on everybody's head every few months. But you also
Right.
believe in, the rights of people, just as a general concept. And I always put it as individual rights. And I think that's the most important
Right.
thing to say, because, and that brings a lot of people together and cuts from both parties. What I see from a lot of third party movements, that exist, you can pick the libertarians, you could pick the Greens, you could pick, a lot of different things, is that they're not setting themselves apart from both parties. They're saying, I don't like the Greens are the best example, I think. Obviously the people voting for Green are not very fond of the Republicans, but they're
Right.
so similar to the Democrats that why would you vote Green? You just vote Democrat. There's there's
Right.
there's, there's
Exactly.
no real there's no real difference there. In fact, most of
Yeah.
the candidates you see in who've run for Green Party positions over the years are just Democrats who couldn't manage to get a nomination for the Democrats, so then they ended up in the Greens. But ideologically, they're almost identical. So that's
Yeah.
what I say. That's why a new party has to have a new, well, coalition of ideas. It has to take the parts that are being neglected from one side or the other and put them together and actually make a party that people want. And so again, that goes back to coalition, and it also goes back to as I say, the poll, where people are willing to leave, but there has to be something for them to go to.
Yeah. It's funny because the first time I heard somebody kind of say, "Hey, I am financially conservative but socially liberal," it
Mm-hmm.
was a neighbor of mine years ago, and who's a lawyer. I really love him to death, even though he's a lawyer, and he'd be the first. Even he'd be the first one to laugh at that. Um, and at that time, I was like scratching my head. It's like that's sort of an oxymoron, right? I mean, it's like how can you truly be fiscally conservative, but then have all these um, kind of liberal ideas when it comes to social causes? But the more and more I thought about it, it's much like you explained. You can have both because what it does is it optimizes things, right?
Yeah,
It's like if you truly believe more freedoms are better and you really believe in the people quotient of that, the the money will follow accordingly, right? I mean, and that doesn't mean more money. It
Right.
just means a better use of the money. And that kind of came home actually this week on the Proposition 1 thing
Yeah.
that happened here. Um, and I mean, here we are in this pretty blue state, right? And it barely passed. And
Yeah.
that told me, even though it passed, um, because I voted against it because even though I understood we have a problem with homeless and all this kind of stuff, it was like, my gosh, how much more do we going to throw into this pot, right? And
Yeah.
I know a lot of it is just simply shifting some money around, and it's not necessarily increasing that many pieces dollars and all that, but it really kind of brought home the point that, hey, I'm concerned about this issue, but I don't necessarily believe that just throwing more money at it at this point
Right.
is going to make any difference.
Yeah.
And so it comes back to your great explanation of that whole theory. And again, what a great place for a third party
Yeah.
to really, hey, listen, this is not about not being socially conscious or being concerned about people's rights and all that. In fact, that's what it is all about.
Right.
But we got to come to some optimized solutions because we're just gonna bankrupt ourselves. And so I think it's a time. It's one of those things where the time has come for that idea.
Yeah. Well, the other thing about Prop One, and this is sort of, a more local California thing, but part of, if my understanding about what's going to happen, and of course, this has just been implemented. So until, people actually
Right.
act on it, you can never really be sure. But the idea is that they promise monies for the homelessness issue in California. But the problem is they then pull money away from the municipalities that are already dealing with the homelessness issue. And
Right.
the things that I have seen are saying that the state government is going to end up taking away more money from the municipalities than they're going to get back. So that way, you're actually taking money away from the actual fight to actually help the homeless population. But
Yep.
then they take that money and they're going to gift it back to their developer friends because the state of California believes in the housing first model, which is, you if you build the houses, people will habitate them.
Yep.
But they've been doing that for years and years again. So this is where the whole idea of fiscal conservativeness comes in, and the idea
Yes.
of, a fiscal conservative idea can actually help people. Instead of robbing the municipalities who are actually doing a better job and taking that money to give it to your developer friends, it would be better to spend the money that was being spent, not raise California's debt and therefore raise the cost of things, which is gonna cause inflation and hurt people generally. And also,
Yep.
when the state government can simply suck money away from the municipalities to support itself, it's never forced to address the fact that its model of what it thinks needs to be done for homelessness needs to change. I mean, California has the largest homelessness problem of any state in the union. And so the idea
Right.
that the state government is simply going to double down on what it's already been doing, well, that just seems like a mistake.
Yeah, no, and that's the reason why I voted against it. It was
Yeah,
kind of going against the grain, even though I believe in the objective,
right.
but the way about going about it is going in the opposite direction of
Exactly.
what has been working. And the housing piece of it obviously is important for those who are unhoused, but simply you can't build enough houses fast enough to solve that problem.
Right.
um, Number one, and but it's all the other things that go around it to help people truly make a difference in their life. House is important. Got to have a roof over your head.
Yeah.
You're going to be a lot in better position. So I kind of get the concept of housing first, but it's got to still be done in the right way. And
Right.
I mean, how many? In fact, I'm trying to think. I'm trying to remember what city. I just heard this on the news last night. Was it Coronado? Somebody's built. They just agreed to build, another multi-unit kind of out homeless thing, and it's
Yeah.
only going to be like 16 things, 16 units, and it's going to take them like 2 years. It's like, I mean, I just, there's got to be better ways of doing this, right? And so that, but again, that's where on the street folks that down in the local communities, they're going to be able to figure it out much faster
Yeah.
for what works for their area
I mean, it's
because it's
also
different,
again, yeah, but it comes back to what we say on this podcast all the time. It's the idea that you need a new infusion of ideas. And right now, California is one of the most stagnant states in the nation as far as ideas go because we have a one party system. There's nothing that
right?
challenges the single party who's running everything to force them to look at what they're doing and potentially make changes, or to have new blood essentially elected into the system who will be willing to make changes or at least look at how things are being done. And again, this goes back to the fiscal conservative idea of thing, of which I think there's a lot of people out there that sort of agree
Yeah,
with it, and that is as a population, how do we hold the government's feet to the fire to force them to address issues? One way obviously is you elect them out of office, but the
right.
other way is enforce fiscal restraint. Say, this is your budget. You have to live within this budget and you have to maximize it. And then if you have people who are not providing the services that people generally believe they should be, well, then you say, okay, well, we need to get people in there who will do this.
Right.
Because you look at the waste and abuse and the fraud that goes on in the way our government is, currently constructed. Well, that has to stop. So there has to be a mechanism to stop that. And the third party does both. One, it forces them to address new ways of spending money, which might not be so abusive or wasteful. And two, it puts them in a position where if they are wasteful and abusive, they can actually be kicked out of office. We have neither of those options in California right now. So we basically have the worst possible situation.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And well, and that kind of builds, well, actually, one other thing that I had on my list of things just to talk about that I think plays to the whole third party thing, another platform idea, is to figure out a better way to resolve the whole gerrymandering thing. Because I
Yeah.
think even in California, I mean, every state gerrymanders. It's,
Oh, yeah, for
I don't
sure.
care if you're red, blue, whatever. I think the red states do a much better job for them gerrymandering than I think
Yeah.
blue states do. But at the end of the day, it's all bad. And
Yeah.
I just keep it's like I just can't understand now. It's again, it goes back to like kind of the whole electoral college thing. There's just some ideas that I think are just kind of out of date these days. It's like gerrymandering to me should be like one of the simplest things to solve these days because it's like we have this thing called GPS where you can
Yeah.
you
Lay
can
out a
literally
grid.
measure down to a millimeter basically. And it's like you can't tell me you can't come up with a pre-formed this is how every district's going to be drawn based on and you're going to have so many, you know, points this direction, this so many points this direction and it applies evenly across the board
Yeah.
um, across each state. And there's no funny business because it's like, okay, well, you got to go this way, 5 clicks, you got to go this way, 5 clicks, you got to go this way, 5 clicks, and just until you get the amount of people you need. And
Right.
there's no playing with it.
Yeah. Well,
And
no.
and you'll still end up with pockets, I'm sure, where there'll
Mhm.
be some that are, you know, highly Democratic or highly Republican or demographically it'll be whites, blacks, Hispanic, whatever. But at least it would be done in a fair fashion.
Mhm.
And in the case of California or places like or Texas for the Republicans, um, you would get I think, a much better true representation of what's going on. And we see it happening like right now in Alabama and all these places where they're fighting over IVF and things like that.
Yeah.
And it's like it doesn't reflect the population, even in those states that are deeply red. It doesn't
Yeah.
even reflect them. And a lot of that comes down to gerrymandering because the people that are running the place, they don't have to really worry about getting reelected.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more on the gerrymandering thing. I mean, a consistent set of rules, governing, districting would allow for, I think, many more competitive districts. And I think
Oh
competition
yeah,
within districts is definitely, the way to go. But I would also say, again, from the third party perspective, if you interject a new party into the equation, because you can't predict as easily how people are going to vote,
right,
it makes gerrymandering much, much more difficult. Because you say, "Oh, well, no, we're going to make this a safe Democrat district," and then you start sucking up small populations of people to get your safe district. But on the other hand, if those people maybe aren't strictly Democrats, but they'd be more
right,
willing to vote for, let's put it this way: there's two reasons that people vote for Democrats, or and you can apply this to the Republicans. They're either actually Democrats or they're anti-Republicans. So let's say you have a district that's made up entirely of Democrats. Well, then it'll always be Democrats. But if your district that you're inventing with the gerrymandering is actually 80% anti Republican and you interject a new party, well,
right,
those anti Republicans might just vote for the new party. They just because they're anti Republican doesn't mean they like the Democrats. They just don't like the Republicans more. And so if you
right.
interject, change into that, then all of a sudden gerrymandering becomes vastly more difficult to achieve.
No, absolutely. I mean, again, the third party is the quickest route to
Mhm.
a solution to so many things. Um, and it could maybe just sort of resolve the gerrymandering thing just by natural causes, right?
Right.
but but so that's definitely where to put the focus. I agree, but at the same time, it's just like, oh my gosh, give
But
me a
but
break, you know?
as far as a policy for the party, I think fair districting. I think
Yeah,
to me that stands out. I mean, I think that is absolutely an important thing to look at because gerrymandering is just like because basically one of the problems we have is incumbency, and I think I have mentioned this on the podcast before.
yes, yeah, we talked about that. Yep,
Once you get elected, the odds that you will be reelected are just, I mean, it's unbelievable the advantages you have
yep,
when you're an incumbent. And then you add on top of all the other, things you could possibly think of that incumbency gives you an advantage of, the ability to essentially draw a safe district for yourself. I mean, that's crazy.
right.
When you start thinking about free
Yeah, you're
elections.
picking the voter. You're
Exactly.
picking the voters. The voters aren't picking you. Yeah, no, exactly. So, yeah, no, actually, what I was thinking now that we're thinking about changing the name, we are going to change the name. Um, maybe on whether it's the next podcast or whenever we actually make it all official, I wanted to go through all the past discussions we've had because I think we've probably got, I'm guessing, 10 or 12 pretty solid policy kind of things that
Yeah,
positions
I'll say
basically a
so.
third party really could separate themselves from the pack. I mean,
Right.
and it's kind of mind-boggling when you think there are that many
Oh yeah.
things. But the whole, financially conservative, socially progressive kind of idea is one of them. Where I think, yeah, you can have those two things. And by socially progressive, I'm not talking about being a radically off to the left.
Yeah.
There's a lot of there's a lot of room there to come to the center because again, it's kind of like the homeless thing. You can say you want to spend a ton of money on that, and we need to spend money on it, no question.
Mm.
But it's not necessarily going to provide the outcome you're looking for. It's a
Yeah.
whole lot of other things that have to go into it.
I think part
And
of
I would say the same thing. Was just, and I'll add to that. I would say the same thing on the federal level for the military,
mm,
because it's like, I mean, there's got to be an optimal level on the military because I mean, nobody ever wants to say, hey, maybe we need to look at military spending,
mm,
um, because that seems to be unpatriotic. And again, I don't think it's unpatriotic at all to have that
yeah,
discussion, considering just the sheer numbers. I don't care what the program is, whether you're talking about military or Social Security or Medicare or any of the big ones, right?
mhm.
There's going to, just by the sheer size of it, there's going to be problems,
Yeah. Well, I
as far as waste and, yeah, and abuse and all that. And it wasn't that long ago that I think the GAO came out and said, God, it was some unreal, crazy amount, like 50, 60% of the military spending, they couldn't totally not
Yeah,
justify, but couldn't audit and find where this money headed off to and how it was managed. It's like, what? I mean, I think that just seemed like way out, but at the same time, no doubt there's some waste and, you know, abuse there.
yeah. Well, I was just going to say that I think what true fiscal conservatism boils down to is bang for the buck.
Right.
If you're really talking about being a party that is influential and can appeal to people, you can't be afraid of the idea that there are things that you're going to have to spend money on.
Yeah.
That's the way it works, you know. But I think that's what gets like the libertarians in trouble. The libertarians are just like, well, we don't need a government to do anything, so we don't have to spend anything. And everybody looks at that, says it's anarchy, and it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So you go in from the start saying, okay, look, we're going to have to spend money on stuff. That's going to happen. But we should always have our eye on what we're spending that on, and what are the American people getting for all that financial expenditure. And one of the key aspects to always look at is you talk about if you're spending a huge amount of money on something, um, you know, there's destined to be problems with it. But I think at this point, and I haven't looked at the debt clock in kind of a while, but the single largest expenditure for the United States now is financing its debt.
Oh yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's a big part of fiscal conservatism too. If we could get rid of this debt, then you'd have vastly more money to spend on other things because it wouldn't be the single largest budget item anymore.
Yeah.
And so part of fiscal conservatism when you build a new party has to be to get the message out to people that it doesn't mean that we don't spend money. It means that we spend money wisely. And by doing that, and we can start to get rid of things like the massive debt payments that we have to make every fiscal year, then we create essentially wealth within our system that we can use to do things that actually do make sense. But it can't be this blind spending on continuing resolutions that nobody ever reads.
Right.
Right? That has to change. And I think
Right.
if you explain things in that way, you know, fiscal conservatism starts to be more appealing, right? Because then
Yep.
it's used to understand that look, to spend money better, to make things better, to actually help people directly as opposed to special interest groups. That's what you need. You need a financial
Yep.
watchdog.
No, absolutely. And even the simple things which have been brought up before that never go anywhere, but again, a third party hopefully could do push some of that stuff is just simply, hey, listen, if you freeze a budget for 1 year,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, instead of having these automatic raises for just because they
Yeah,
are, it kind of goes back to our discussion a while back about doing a consumption tax versus a
income
income
tax. Yeah,
tax, where, hey, as a family, it's like, hey, this year things are a little slow. We're we're freezing the budget, if not dropping the budget, right?
right,
I mean, unfortunately, that's kind of what we have to look at as a country too. And
right.
I'm not one to say, you should run the country like a business because they're not really
Yeah, they're not really
people.
analogous.
It's not a fair comparison,
Yeah,
but I do think there's some common sense things like, hey, back to the debt. Hey, we're spending more money just paying the interest and all that on the debt that we just need to freeze everything for a year or two
yeah,
and just start peeling this back, which will actually be more financially beneficial for everybody in the long run
yeah.
because we will have more money.
Right. And another thing that I know we've mentioned on this podcast many times is cost. You know, is I
Right.
say if you're doing things that are driving inflation, and then you end up driving inflation, which causes interest rates to go up because they're constantly raising interest rates to try and hold down the inflation. Well, that's bad for everybody.
Yeah.
Consistently bad for everybody all the time. So, one way that you could actually improve the lives of every single person in the country, regardless of be rich, poor, immigrant,
Right.
citizen, whatever, is you bring down cost. And once you can start bringing down cost, again, which is a fiscally conservative concept to try and do, well, you've just made everything better for everybody. So why is that not, appealing?
Right. And when we've all gone through it personally, right? It's like,
Yeah.
hey, this month's a little tight or whatever. You learn to get real creative, right?
Yeah.
Get creative and you figure out, oh, do I really need that? And all that. And I understand when you're talking about trillions of dollars, you have to be a little careful that, you know, you
Yeah.
you could really send the economy into the tank if you go too crazy with it. So
Yeah.
it's got to be done obviously with some thought process to it and all that. But
Yeah.
at the same time, the same theory holds true. I
Yeah.
mean, sometimes, it's like, hey, I got to start taking my lunch and not going out to lunch every day. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've
As I
all
say,
been
I
there.
think the idea that you're willing is that you go with the idea that you are willing to spend money, but there isn't anything that's necessarily so sacred that you can't at least look at it. Then
Yep.
I think that's the sort of the position where you want to be at.
All right. Well, I think we better wrap this up, and we
Yeah.
need to start working on all that big platform stuff I just talked about. And
Yeah.
if you go back through, you'll be surprised at how many, I think, just general philosophy things that we've talked about that really separate a third party from the uniparty.
Yeah.
Um, and they're these are simple enough concepts that I think if a third party starts getting behind some of these things and being very adamant about, hey, we can all do this, it
Yeah.
just changes the conversation.
Yeah.
And again, hey, if you want to continue to be a Republican or a Democrat or whatever, that's
Right.
whatever, that's fine. But just make sure you're focused on those candidates and all that are out there that have these principles in mind.
Right.
Um, so we move forward.
Yeah, no, as I say, you're right in my wheelhouse now because I've been thinking for, ever since the Ross Perot days, what would it take to make a party that can state clearly why it's not one of the other two parties? Because that to me is
Yep.
what's missing. There are already lots of other parties in the
Yes.
United States. There's the Libertarian Party, there's the Green Party, there's the I don't know, the National Independence Party, I think is another one.
Right.
They're out there, but they don't have a message that has to be two things. It has to be appealing to a broad number of people, and it can't be so similar to the other parties that
Right.
there's no reason to differentiate between the two.
Yeah.
And so, as I say, if we want to go down that path, next week or whatever, I'm ready.
All right. Good. 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 Well, I'm gonna put that on my list. I'm gonna do my best to. I just want to go through and go. Hey, we've talked about this, 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 and this, and we'll kind of have our little constitutional convention.
Yeah, there you go.